Left for Coyotes behind a stagecoach station. A cowboy rode through the dark and gave her morning. The horse smelled her before I did. I'd been riding since before first light, somewhere out of the Cimarron Basin, heading roughly northwest toward nothing I could name, just away from the last thing I'd done, which was bury a man I'd had no quarrel with until 3 days prior when he decided I owed him something. I didn't. He didn't survive the disagreement. There wasn't a marshal within 40 miles who'd lose sleep over it, but I had learned a long time ago that staying in one place after a thing like that turned neighbors into bounty hunters, so I rode. The Overo mare I had then, a rough-mouthed paint I'd won in a card game outside Dodge and never bothered to name, she went stiff-legged about 100 yards back from the Caldwell relay station. Ears pinned, nostrils going, not the kind of stiff she did for a coyote or a skunk, the other kind, the kind that meant person. It was late October. The air had that thin, mean quality it gets in the Oklahoma Territory when the cold hasn't committed yet but is making its intentions clear. There was no moon worth mentioning. The station itself was dark, not sleeping dark, but abandoned dark, door hanging half open, the stock pen empty, grass grown up through the boards of the porch. Hadn't been a working station for a year at least. I sat the mare and listened. Somewhere behind the building, past the outhouse and a collapsed hay shelter, there was a sound. Not loud, not continuous. The kind of sound a person makes when they've given up on being found but the body hasn't caught up with the decision yet. I pulled the Winchester from the scabbard and rode around. She was on the ground against the back wall, half under a piece of collapsed shed roofing, which is the only reason the coyotes hadn't got to her already. They'd been at it. I could see the scratches in the dirt around the roofing, the circled pad marks. She'd lasted the night because something heavy had fallen and covered most of her. Lucky, or unlucky depending on how you looked at it, because whatever had happened to her had not been accidental. I stepped down, stood there a moment. A man learns not to rush these things. She was alive, breathing in the shallow, careful way of someone with broken ribs. Her face was bad, one eye swollen completely shut, a cut along her jaw that had crusted over but not cleanly. Someone had hit her more than once and with some intention behind it. Her dress had been a good one once, dark green wool, the kind a woman wears when she's trying to be respectable. It was torn at the shoulder and the hem was gone. Her boots were missing. She was maybe 30, hard to say what the damage. I didn't touch her right away. I crouched down about 3 feet off and said, "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just a rider. You're at the Caldwell station. You need water." She didn't answer. Her one good eye opened about halfway. Brown, very still. The look a person has when they've already decided how things end and are mildly surprised to be questioned about it. I went to my saddlebag and got the canteen and came back and held it toward her. Not at her, toward her. Let her reach if she wanted. She looked at it for a long moment, then her hand came out. Slow and deliberate, like she was expecting me to pull it back. I didn't. She got hold of it and drank. Not desperately, carefully, like someone who'd been sick before and knew what happened if you didn't. "How long have you been here?" I said. Her mouth moved. "Since yesterday morning." Her voice was low and level. No crying, no hysteria. That told me something. Women who cry at a moment like that haven't hit bottom yet. She had. "Can you stand?" "I don't know." "All right." I went inside the station to see what was left. The main room had been cleaned out. The relay companies took everything useful when they abandoned a line. But in the back room, which had probably been the station master's sleeping quarters, there was a rope cot with a canvas ticking still on it, a broken lantern that I could fix with a wick from my kit, and a wood stove with about half a cord of split wood stacked against the wall. Someone had been through here more recently than the company. The wood box was newer than the station. I got the lantern going first, then the stove. Then I went back out. Getting her inside took longer than it should have. She had 2 cracked ribs. I found that out when I tried to help her to her feet, and she made a sound I hadn't heard a person make since the war. Not a scream, worse than that. The sound a body makes when the pain is so large there's no room left for voice. I held her upright while she breathed through it. Didn't say anything, nothing to say. We got her inside, got her onto the cot. I had clean water in a second canteen, and I got the dried blood off her face and looked at the cut on her jaw, which needed closing but wasn't going to kill her if it didn't get closed tonight. I had a small suturing kit in my bag. Trail surgeons used them. I'd taken mine off a dead one in the war and kept it ever since, and I asked her if she wanted me to close it or leave it. She looked at me out of that one working eye. "Will it scar less if you do?" "Some," I said. Then do it. I did it. She held still the entire time and didn't make a sound. When I was done, she asked me my name. I told her. She said hers was Delia Marsh. She'd been a laundress at Fort Supply until 2 months ago. She didn't volunteer what happened at Fort Supply or on the road, and I didn't ask. I made coffee. I had grounds and a pot and a tin cup, which was most of my kitchen. I gave her the cup. She wrapped both hands around it and held it against her chest like it was the last warm thing left in the world. Outside, the wind was starting up. The temperature was dropping fast. I'd been in the territory long enough to know what that meant. By morning, there would be snow. I sat against the wall across from her and drank my coffee out of the lid of the pot, which was how I drank it when I was alone. She watched me, not nervously, more like she was making some calculation. "You could have kept writing," she said. "Could have. Why didn't you?" I thought about it. The real answer was the horse, but that wasn't all of it, and she probably knew that. "My mother would have come back from the grave," I said. She almost smiled. The cut pulled and she stopped herself, but it was there for a moment, just the shape of it under the damage. That was the first night. The snow came like I said it would. By morning, the ground was covered and the wind was moving it sideways. We were not going anywhere. I went out at first light before she woke to see about water and anything else useful. The station well was still good. The casing was cracked but not collapsed, and the water came up clean enough. I found half a sack of oats that had been left behind, mostly dry, enough to keep the mare from going desperate. Behind the hay shelter, there was a rusted but intact box trap, the kind for small game. I reset it with a bit of dried jerky from my saddle bag. When I got back inside, she was sitting up, which was more than she'd managed the night before. The eye was still swollen shut. The other one tracked me across the room. "You went out without a rifle," she said. I hadn't thought she'd been awake enough to notice. "Didn't need one for water," I said. "You don't know what else is out there." "No," I said. "I suppose I don't." She seemed to find that answer acceptable. I made a kind of broth from the last of my dried salt beef, boiled down with some dried onion I had, and she ate it. Carefully because of the ribs, but she finished it. Then she asked me if there was something she could do, something useful, and I said yes. She could stay on that cot and let those ribs start to heal, because a rib that doesn't get 2 weeks of rest early turns into a rib that gives a person trouble for 20 years. She didn't argue. That surprised me. "You know medicine," she said. "Some, the kind you learn when there's no doctor." She was quiet for a moment. Then, Fort Supply had a surgeon. He was useless. I didn't respond to that. The fire was going well. Outside, the snow ticked against the single window. "The men who did this," I said, "they follow you out of Supply." "No," she said. "I didn't come from Supply. I left Supply 2 months ago. These men were on the stage." She paused. "The driver and one of the passengers. The passenger had money. The driver was afraid of him." Another pause. "There were 2 other passengers, a drummer and an old woman. They put us all off at this station, said there was trouble with the wheel. The old woman started crying. The drummer tried to run." A long silence. "I don't know what happened to the drummer." I knew what had happened to the drummer. I didn't say so. "The old woman. They left her at the station. She was too old to be worth it." She stopped. "She was sick. She might not have lasted the night." I looked at the fire. That was 2 days ago, which meant if the old woman had made it through, she was somewhere in the territory in a snowstorm with no shelter. I thought about that for a while. I thought about the fact that I didn't know which direction the stage would have gone. I thought about the fact that with a foot of snow on the ground and more coming, there were things that couldn't be done. I was not a man who spent much time on things that couldn't be done. I had learned that in the war and learned it again in the years after, the years that turned me into whatever I was by the time I found Delia Marsh. "Tell me about her," I said. "The old woman, what she looked like." Delia told me. White-haired, heavy-set, traveling to Caldwell to see her daughter. Name of Mrs. Pierce. Had a black leather bag she wouldn't let go of. I put it away for later. In the morning, if the snow let up, I could ride the stage road east and west and see what I found. That afternoon, the box trap had a rabbit in it. I skinned it outside in the snow and brought it in and cooked it over the stove on a piece of bent metal that served as a pan, and Delia sat up on the cot and watched me work. She had more color than she'd had the night before. The broth had helped. The warmth had helped. People are tougher than they think they are, generally, or maybe they're tougher than other people think they are. Both. "You do that like you've done it your whole life," she said. Pretty much have, I said. Where are you from? Missouri, long time ago. Family. I turned the rabbit. Had some, I said, not anymore. She didn't push it, I respected that. The wrong kind of person pushes that question to seem caring. The right kind of person lets a man choose what he carries out loud. We ate the rabbit off the bone by the stove. The wind was still up. It sounded like the territory was trying to take the roof off the station, but the building was solid adobe and it held. After a while she said, I had a husband, he died at Franklin, that was 64. I was at Franklin, I said. She looked at me. Not for the Union, I said. She was quiet for a moment. He was with the 44th Missouri Infantry. Then I was on the other side of the field from him. She absorbed that. Then he was a good man, not a soldier, just a farmer who thought he should go. She looked at the fire. I don't know what I was supposed to do after, I just kept going. That's mostly all there is, I said. Outside the snow went on. Inside the stove ticked and the rabbit bones were on the floor, and the lantern put out a warm yellow that made the whole room look like something it probably wasn't. The snow stopped the morning of the third day. I rode east along the stage road about 4 miles and found Mrs. Pierce alive in a dry creek bed, sheltered under a cut bank, wrapped in a horse blanket that the drummer, who had not been killed after all, just badly beaten and robbed, had given her before he'd walked north toward the nearest ranch house. The old woman was cold and frightened and her hip was troubling her, but she was alive, and when I got her onto the mare and started back, she talked the entire way. Not out of fear, out of relief. Some people go quiet when things go wrong and some people talk. She was a talker. I got her to the station. When we came through the door, Delia was on her feet, carefully, one hand braced on the wall, but on her feet, and the look on her face when she saw the old woman was something I've carried ever since. Not surprise exactly, something larger, like she'd made herself stop hoping for a thing and then had to figure out what to do when she got it. The two women held each other for a while. I went back outside and tended to the mare and let them have it. When I came back in, Delia had the old woman on the cot and was checking her hip with a competence that surprised me. She'd been a laundress, she'd said, but the way she ran her hands along the old woman's hip, the way she listened and asked questions, that was more than laundry. You trained somewhere, I said, when Mrs. Pierce was comfortable and dozing. Delia glanced at me. I helped the post surgeon at Supply for about 6 months before she stopped. For 6 months. Before what? She looked back at Mrs. Pierce. Before his wife arrived at the post and decided she didn't like the arrangement. I understood the arrangement and what it had probably cost Delia and what it said about the surgeon that the arrangement had existed at all. I didn't say any of that. I just nodded. You're good at it, I said. She said nothing for a moment, then, thank you. It was the first time she'd said that to me about anything. I didn't point it out. We stayed at the station 12 days in the end. The second storm came through on day 4 and lasted 3 days and made the road impassable, and by the time it cleared, Mrs. Pierce's hip had stiffened badly enough that moving her was dangerous. Delia made that assessment. I trusted it. The days settled into a shape. I hunted in the morning the box trap twice and twice with the Winchester, a pair of prairie chickens, and once a young doe that gave us 3 days of good eating. I kept the wood in. I checked on the mare. The station, which had felt like a ruin the first night, began to feel like a place where people lived. There was a difference. I was aware of it without being able to name it. In the afternoons, Delia sat near the window where the light came in and worked on Mrs. Pierce, who did not need much physically but needed considerable amounts of talking to, which Delia provided with a patience I did not have. I watched them sometimes from across the room. The old woman asked Delia about her life, her plans, where she was going. Delia answered quietly and honestly, and I noticed, after a few days, that the answers were changing. When she'd first started telling Mrs. Pierce about her plans, they'd been the plans of someone who had none vague talk about heading to Caldwell, finding work. That kind of talk that isn't planning so much as just the sound of going through motions. But by the end of the first week, she'd started talking about a town called Hennessy, 70 miles north, where there was a new hospital and a doctor named Griggs who had advertised for nurses the previous spring. I heard her, I didn't say anything about it. On the 8th night the fire had burned low and Mrs. Pierce was asleep, and I was sitting with the Winchester across my knees, which was an old habit I couldn't seem to shed, Always something between me and the door when Delia came and sat on the floor beside my chair. Not close. A foot away, close enough that I was aware of it. "Why do you carry that inside?" she said. "Habit," I said. "From the war. From after the war, mostly." She looked at it. The Winchester was a good one, a model of 1873, and I kept it clean. "Do you ever think about stopping?" she said. "Just setting it in a corner and not picking it back up." "Thought about it," I said. "And every time I've done that, something's come along to make me pick it back up." She was quiet for a moment. The fire gave a small pop. Outside, the wind was low, just a murmur. "I think about the men who did this to me," she said. It wasn't dramatic. She said it the way she said most things, flat and direct. "I think about them and I try to decide what I want, whether I want someone to find them. Whether I want to be the kind of person who wants that." She paused. "I don't know what I want." "That's honest," I said. "Is it, or is it just a woman not being sure she's allowed to want a thing?" "I thought about that, both maybe." She looked at me for a moment. "You'd go after them if I asked?" It wasn't a question. She was just stating what she knew to be true. "Yes," I said. "I'm not going to ask," she said. "All right. Not because I think it's wrong, because I don't want you to go." The fire popped again. I sat with that for a while. Outside, the wind moved across the roof. The old woman breathed steadily on the cot. "Where are you headed?" she said. "Before you found me." "Where were you going?" "Nowhere specific." "There must be something." "There was a man I heard about in the neutral strip who owed me money from a job I did 2 years ago. Heard he'd settled on a piece of land down there. I was thinking about writing down and collecting." "Was that all?" I looked at her. "That was all." She nodded slowly. "So you were riding away from something, not toward anything." I didn't answer because it was true, and there wasn't anything useful to add to it. "I've been doing that for 3 years," she said. "Since Fort Supply, since before Supply, since Franklin, if I'm honest." She tucked her knees up against her ribs, carefully protecting them. "There's a difference between surviving and going somewhere. I know what surviving feels like. I've gotten very good at it." "You have," I said. She looked at me. The swelling on her eye had come down enough that both eyes were open now. They were dark even in the firelight. "What does it cost you," she said, "staying here these days?" "Nothing I had anywhere to be." "That's not what I mean." I thought about what she meant. "Nothing I grudge," I said. She held my look for a moment. Then she said, "Good," and got up and went back to the cot. I sat there another hour with the rifle on my knees, listening to the station breathe, and thought about what "nothing I grudge" meant when a man said it out loud. On the 11th day, I rode into a settlement called Grierson's Crossing, 8 miles northeast, a rough place, 3 buildings and a trading post and a corral, but it had a wagon and a man with a mule who was willing to make the run to Caldwell for $5. I gave him 7 and told him to take it slow. Then I bought what the trading post had, which wasn't much. A small sack of cornmeal, a tin of molasses, a coil of rope, a pair of women's boots that looked close enough to Delia's size, and a wool blanket with some life still in it. On the way back, the sky was enormous and flat and colorless, the kind of sky the territory gets in early winter that looks like it was made to humble a man. The snow was old now, crusted, and the mare's hooves broke through it at every step with a sound like breaking crockery. I thought about what I was carrying: the boots, the blanket, the rope. I had not bought anything for myself. When I got back, Delia was outside the station, standing in the cold air looking northwest. She heard the mare and turned. I came up and dismounted and pulled the boots from the saddlebag first and held them out to her. She looked at them, looked at me. "They might not fit exactly," I said. She took them, sat down right there on the station step in the cold, and put them on over her stockings. They were close enough. She stood and took a few steps and turned back. "How much were they?" she said. "Doesn't matter." "Yes, it does. Call it the cost of a passenger on my ride to Hennessy," I said, "if that's the direction you're going." She was very still for a moment. The cold wind moved her hair across her face, and she didn't bother pushing it away. "You're going to Hennessy?" she said. Seemed like a reasonable direction. She held my gaze. She had a way of looking at a man that didn't let him hide much. I had noticed it early on and gotten used to it, and then, somewhere in the middle of those 12 days, had stopped minding it. "You don't have any business in Hennessy," she said. "No," I said. "You're riding 70 miles out of nowhere to nowhere to make sure 2 women get to a town safe." "Mrs. Pierce's hip won't take a long ride in a wagon," I said. "She needs to go slow. Someone should be with her." "And me," said Delia. I looked at her. "You can make your own way if you want to." She held my look for a long time. The wind was cutting. Neither of us moved. "I don't want to," she said. The ride to Hennessy took 4 days. The wagon man from Grierson's Crossing drove, and I rode alongside, which meant I was in the cold and the wind most of the day. But I didn't mind cold, never had. Mrs. Pierce rode in the wagon bed, propped up with both blankets, and talked more or less continuously, which seemed to suit the wagon driver fine because he was that particular kind of quiet man who is not truly comfortable with silence. Delia rode with me the first day. She was not an experienced rider, but she sat a horse without complaint, and by noon she'd found her balance well enough to hold a conversation. She told me about Hennessy, what she knew of it from advertisements, from something a cavalry sergeant's wife had told her. New town, new hospital, 300 people and growing. Land was cheap. "And you know this doctor's name?" I said. "Griggs." "I know his advertisement. I don't know him." "What if he's another supply surgeon?" She looked at me. "Then I leave," she said. "That's the advantage of going towards something instead of away from it. You know which direction to go back." I thought about that for a while. On the second day, Mrs. Pierce, who had apparently been running some long calculation of her own, asked me from the wagon bed what my intentions were. I said I didn't follow. She said she thought I followed quite well. The wagon driver kept his eyes on the road. Delia looked at the horizon. "I'm seeing her to Hennessy," I said. "And after Hennessy," said Mrs. Pierce. "Haven't thought about it." "That is," said Mrs. Pierce, "a very strategic answer." Delia said nothing, but the corner of her mouth moved. That night we camped in a dry cottonwood draw, and I got the fire going and made coffee, and Mrs. Pierce fell asleep almost immediately after eating, which was becoming her pattern, and the wagon driver rolled into his blanket under the wagon, and Delia and I sat by the fire. She had her knees up again, arms wrapped around them. The firelight moved across her face. The cut on her jaw had closed well. There would be a scar, small and diagonal, but the kind that becomes part of a face rather than a damage to it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You generally do," I said. "What happened to your family in Missouri?" I looked at the fire. It was not a subject I opened for most people. But she wasn't most people, and she'd asked it directly, and I was tired of the weight of keeping it shut. "My wife and daughter," I said. 1863, I was away. There were men who burned the farm." I stopped, started again. "I came back to ashes." She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say anything for a while. That was the right thing. The people who tell you they're sorry when a thing like that is 10 years gone are talking to make themselves comfortable, not to help you. After a while she said, "How long did you ride away after that?" 10 years, I said, "give or take." She nodded. "I rode away for 3, she said. "It feels like longer." "It always does." The fire had burned down to its red bones. Out in the dark, the horses were quiet. "I think," she said slowly, "that you are a good man who has been alone too long." I didn't answer. "I think you've spent 10 years making sure no one can say you failed to protect them because you couldn't protect the ones that mattered." She wasn't looking at me, looking at the fire. "And I think that the reason you haven't set the rifle in the corner is because setting it down means admitting that the protecting is done, and then you have to figure out what comes next." I sat with that for a long time. The fire breathed. "That's a fair reading," I said. She turned her head and looked at me, both eyes clear, the firelight in them. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "After Hennessy, I don't plan to leave." She paused. "I'm telling you that because I think you need to know it before you decide what you're doing." She got up and went to her bedroll, and I sat there by the fire with the Winchester on my knees and the cottonwood overhead, and the enormous quiet of the territory all around. And somewhere in the middle of that, I set the rifle on the ground beside me. Just for a while, just to see. We came into Hennessy on a Wednesday, cold and clear. The main street still churned mud from recent traffic. Newer than most towns I'd ridden into, the wood of the storefront still yellow and raw, some of the signs not even painted yet. A barber shop, a dry goods, a two-story building at the far end with a hand-lettered sign that said HENNESSEY Hospital and Physician. I got Mrs. Pierce down from the wagon and into the hospital, which had 4 beds and a clean floor and a doctor who turned out to be 40 and brisk and competent-looking. Not supply surgeon-looking. Mrs. Pierce's daughter arrived within the hour, having been alerted by a rider sent ahead. The wagon driver's doing, it turned out, on his own initiative. He was a better man than I'd credited him. When the mother and daughter had their reunion and the doctor had got Mrs. Pierce settled and gone, Delia and I stood in the hospital anteroom. She had her arms at her sides. Her dark coat, Mrs. Pierce had pressed it on her before we left the station, was good quality and fit her well and made her look like what she was, which was a composed and capable woman who'd been through something hard and come out the other side of it knowing her own weight. "I'm going to ask Dr. Griggs about the position," she said. "Now, is there a reason to wait?" There wasn't. I held the door for her. She was in there 20 minutes. When she came out, she had a job, starting Monday, which was 5 days away. Room above the hardware store, $1.50 a week, which was fair for Hennessy in 1876. She told me this standing in the street with the wind coming off the flat land to the west, and she was matter-of-fact about it, the way she was about most things. But there was something underneath it, not triumph exactly, more like relief at a thirst finally answered. "Congratulations," I said. "Thank you," she looked at me. "What are you going to do?" "I need to board the mare," I said. "Get a meal, think." "There's a livery on the north end," she said, "and a boarding house next to the dry goods, Mrs. Canfield. She's reasonable." "You found all this out already?" I asked the doctor's wife, the corner of her mouth again. "She's very informative." I looked at her for a moment. She looked back. "Come for supper," she said. "Mrs. Canfield takes boarders for meals 6 o'clock." I said all right. I boarded the mare and washed up at the livery trough and found a barber and let him do his work, which he did without commentary, which I appreciated. Looked at myself afterward in the small mirror he tilted toward me. I was 41 that fall. I looked it, or close enough. The years in the open country had done what they do. I wasn't the man who'd ridden away from Missouri in 1863. That man had been young in a way that the war had already been burning out of him, and what was left by the time I rode away had been something harder and quieter and less sure of its welcome anywhere. The man in the mirror was not that man anymore either, but he wasn't certain what man he was. I put on the clean shirt from my saddlebag and went to supper. The boarding house table had 6 people at it, Mrs. Canfield, who was widowed and ran a clean operation, a land agent named Forsyth, a young carpenter and his wife, and Delia. She was across the table. She'd combed her hair and the bruising was fading to yellow and green, and she looked like someone settling into her own face again. Mrs. Canfield asked how we knew each other, and Delia said I'd helped her out of some trouble on the road, matter of fact, no drama. Mrs. Canfield gave me a look that said she was putting the rest of the story together on her own, which she probably was. Forsyth, the land agent, asked what my plans were for the territory. I said I wasn't sure. He said there was good land north of town, a section that had reverted to the territory after the original homesteader defaulted, could be had for back taxes and a filing fee. Decent water, he said, south-facing slope, good for cattle or a small farm operation. I said I'd look at it. I caught Delia's eye across the table. She was very carefully not looking like that meant anything to her. She was the worst kind of careful I'd seen. After supper, we walked the main street in the cold, not talking much. The stars were out, the full spread of them, the way they only appear when you're a long way from anything else that gives off light. At the end of the street, we stopped at the edge of town where the boardwalk ended, and the plain began. "That land Forsyth mentioned," she said. "I'd need to look at it." "But you're thinking about it." "I'm thinking about a lot of things." She turned. We were close enough that I could see the color of her eyes even in the dark, the same brown that had looked at me from the ground behind that ruined station. That first look measuring, still prepared to be disappointed. What it looked like now was different, not naive. She wasn't a woman who did naive, but open, unlocked. "I told you I wasn't going anywhere," she said. "You did." "I meant it." "I know." She reached up and put her hand on the side of my face, just rested it there. Her palm was warm and the night was cold, and she looked at me with both eyes clear, and something in that look was so plain and steady and without reservation that it hit me like a physical thing. Not soft, she wasn't soft about it. She did it the way she did everything, with her whole self and no apology. I put my hand over hers, held it there. We stood at the edge of Hennessy with the plain stretching out west in the dark, and the stars doing what stars do, which is shine on whoever happens to be standing under them without making any distinctions. "You're a good man," she said, not gently, like it was a fact she'd tested and confirmed. "Working on it," I said. She almost smiled, the full version this time, not stopped by the cut. "You have been," she said, "since before you knew I was watching." I looked at Forsyth's land the next morning, south-facing slope, like he said, a good spring on the west edge, running clear even in November. The grass was old and winter-flat, but you could see what it had been in season and would be again. The previous man had started a foundation, creek stone, solid work, abandoned at the knee wall. Someone had known what they were doing, they just hadn't got to finish it. There's something about a piece of work that someone started right and couldn't finish. It asks something of you, not of everyone, but some men feel it. I rode around the perimeter twice, took my time. Thought about what a herd would need, what a building would need, what a man would need who was done going away from things and had decided to go toward them instead. Then I rode back to town and found Forsyth at his office and did the paperwork. The back taxes were $68. I had that and more. The filing fee was $5. He shook my hand. I was a landowner in the territory before noon on a Thursday, which was not something I'd expected to be able to say when I'd ridden into that week. On Monday, Delia started at the hospital. On Tuesday, I started on the foundation. It was hard work and cold work and mostly my own work, though a carpenter named Hull who boarded at Mrs. Canfield's came out 2 afternoons a week after his regular jobs were done because he liked building and didn't much like sitting still. We didn't talk a lot. We worked. The wall came up course by course, creek stone fitted against creek stone, plumb and true, going up out of the ground the way things do when they're being built right. Some evenings Delia walked out from town to see the progress. She'd stand at the edge and look and not say much. Sometimes she'd hand me a cup of coffee from the pot she'd carried out, and I'd drink it standing in the frame of what was going to be a wall, and we'd look at the land together. The flat plain to the south and west. The creek line with its bare cottonwoods. The sky that in the winter evenings turned colors a man had no words for. One evening in December she walked out and stood looking at the walls and said, "Where is the window going?" "East wall," I said, "first light." She nodded, "Good," paused, "I want a big one." "All right." She looked at me. "I'm telling you what I want in the house," she said. "I heard you. Just making sure you understood what I meant." "I understood," I said. She reached out and took my hand, not the delicate way, the way of someone who means to hold on. We stood there in the cold frame of the walls with the sky going red at the edge of the world, and the creek running in the dark below, and the mare at her picket watching us with the mild interest horses take in people who finally figure out what they're doing. It was not a warm moment in any simple sense. The cold was real. The work ahead was real. The land was raw and the house was just walls, and it would be hard getting through to spring. But I was standing still. That was real too. My hand around hers, her shoulder against my arm. Both of us looking at the same horizon, which is a thing you can only do when you've stopped going different directions. There are men who go through the whole of their lives and never get that. A good woman beside them and the whole plain ahead, and the work to do making something out of what's there instead of riding away from what isn't. The reasons it doesn't happen are not always the man's fault. Sometimes the country takes what you had, and there's nothing to be done about it. Sometimes the years add up wrong. Sometimes you make the wrong turn at a relay station on a cold October night, and you keep going, and that's just how it goes. And sometimes the horse smells something, and you stop. The walls were good walls. They'd hold through spring. In the morning, I'd go back to them. For now, I stood still, which was harder than it sounds for a man like me. But she was there, and her hand was in mine, and the last of the light was going gold on the stone. And I'd learned enough in 41 years to know that standing still when it matters is the whole of the work. Everything else is just weather,